This video is sponsored by NordVPN. As you can probably see, this right here is not my usual studio, and that's because I'm actually visiting my brother and having a small holiday. But with Trump in the White House, that's simply not possible, as he announced a new round of tariffs that will affect Europe these last couple of days. And honestly, I think it's time for Europe to rip off the bandage, because all of these deals we're creating with America simply do not work. We need a China approach. But before we get into all of that, let's actually look at what happened. Over the last couple of weeks, Trump has been escalating threats around Greenland, not just politically, but also militarily, using the kind of language that makes us Europeans a bit nervous. And Europe has reacted. Multiple European countries, I think it was 8, sent a small number of troops or military personnel over to Greenland, not to antagonize Trump, but basically to show the world that we're serious about protecting the Arctic region. But Trump did not like it, and on Saturday, he hit out on Truth Social. He wrote that tariffs would come in 2 stages, 10% starting February the 1st, and then rising to 25% from June onwards if no deal is made. And he literally said, this tariff will be due and payable until such time as a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland. I mean, that's about as clear a form of blackmail as you can get. And this comes as protests are happening in both Denmark and Greenland, because, shockingly, people don't like the idea of being treated like a product on a shelf. And then there's the part that makes everything worse. About 5-6 months ago, Ursula von der Leyen already signed a trade agreement with the US, which was incredibly bad for Europe and very good for the United States. And let me remind you how bad it actually was. 15% tariff on EU goods going into the US, 50% tariffs on aluminium and steel, and on top of that, the EU also promised to invest more in the US, buy more US LNG, and buy more US military equipment. And all of this just so we could keep trading with the US like normal. And of course, because this deal was so balanced, US goods coming into Europe wouldn't face the same tariffs. It really was a humiliation. And now, Trump wants more. His new tariffs would look like this. His existing 15% tariff plus the new 25%. And for some sectors, the 50% steel tariff plus the 25% by June this year. And this is exactly what I warned about 4 or 5 months ago. Trump's words mean very, very little. Even though a trade deal is signed, every time that Trump needs leverage over something else, like Ukraine and now Greenland, he will go back and rip this agreement up and charge additional tariffs to the European Union or other countries around the world. So basically, our way of making deals with the US simply don't work anymore, and we need to react differently. But before we get into that, a quick word from our sponsor, NordVPN. Because one of the great ironies of our single market here in Europe is that despite free movement on paper, your digital access still changes the moment you move across a border. I really noticed this last year. I travel a lot for work, from Brussels to Strasbourg and even to conferences in Spain. And that's exactly where NordVPN comes in. Link in the description below. Because whether I'm editing scripts or answering emails from a cafe, hopping between trains or using hotel Wi-Fi, I know my connection is encrypted and consistent, even on public networks. I just turn it on and don't even have to think about it. And in the evening, when things slow down, I can use NordVPN to keep accessing my paid online services back at home. So everything looks and works the way I'm used to while I'm traveling. If the single market is about reducing friction, NordVPN does the same thing online. You can get an exclusive NordVPN deal plus 4 extra months by going to nordvpn.com/EUMadeSimple. And it's completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Now, back to Trump's tariffs and how the EU is responding. Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson says Europe won't be blackmailed. And France's President Emmanuel Macron says no threat will influence us. But to be honest, this is just talk. So what can, or even better, what should the EU do in response? First, we need to freeze this terrible EU-US trade deal. And fortunately, that might actually happen, because von der Leyen's deal still isn't approved by the European Parliament. And now, the big political groups in the parliament are all turning against it. The Socialists, Renew, and now even the EPP, the groups that have been pushing for this deal for ages, are all saying they're ready to vote no. Even Manfred Weber, the leader of the EPP, came out and said, the EPP is in favor of the EU-US trade deal, but given Trump's threats regarding Greenland, approval is not possible at this stage. He also added something even more important. The 0% tariffs on US products must be put on hold. So yeah, the first step is already happening. But is this really enough? Because Macron definitely doesn't think so. He's calling for Europe's Anti-Coercion Instrument. It's the strongest tool in the EU's arsenal to hit back at countries that are blackmailing Europe. And the idea is super simple. The EU looks at how serious the bullying is and then responds with serious countermeasures. And this tool is way stronger than people think, because the EU could slap tariffs on US goods, restrict US services in Europe, block American investments, shut US companies out of public contracts, and yes, it can even go after something the US really cares about, intellectual property. That means Europe could weaken the special legal protections US companies rely on, like patents or copyrights, and then make it a condition that the US backs off before things go to normal. This really isn't just trade retaliation. It's Europe's way of saying, we are not going to be threatened into doing whatever you want. This is what I think. I think the European Union only really has three options. And option one would be abandoning Greenland. Not officially, of course. They dress it up around letting Greenlanders decide. But in practice, it would mean opening talks with Trump and maybe eventually moving to some sort of referendum. Something around Greenland joining the US or Greenland being bought or something else that's similar. So yeah, that would probably avoid tariffs, but it would also send a message to the world that Europe can be pressured into giving up territory. Then there's option two, doing nothing and just accepting the tariffs. This has kind of been a classic in the EU, basically hoping that Trump loses interest and that the tariffs eventually will not happen, because he is distracted often by other things going on around the world. But to be honest, this is not really a strategy and really does risk Greenland's security. And that brings us to option three, defending Greenland, both economically with counter tariffs and if needed the Anti-Coercion Instrument, but also militarily. This would mean sending troops, like we already did, over to Greenland, potentially also a navy, for example the Charles de Gaulle from the French Navy, and maybe even creating a base right there in Greenland with European military stationed there. And the EU has kind of started to do this, which means that they're kind of stuck between option 2 and 3, which is a great start. But honestly, if you were to ask me, I want option 3. Because we've seen this movie before. Trump does not stick to agreements, and he doesn't even respect his own deals. He uses tariffs as leverage again and again and again. So Europe really needs to take a more China-like approach, meaning that if you bully us, we respond with strength. So the EU-US trade deal, let's freeze it now. The Anti-Coercion Instrument, activate it now. European troops on Greenland? Yes, and more. And like I said in my previous video, Europe should go a step further. Let's build a real EU presence on Greenland with a permanent base, rotating missions, and joint European exercises. And this will send a clear message. Europe can be strong in the Arctic, and Europe can do it together, not as 27 separate nation states. And this, in my opinion, is the most likely deterrence or the best deterrence to stop Trump intervention in Greenland. Thank you so much for watching. And if you want to support the channel, you can also check out NordVPN via the link in the description. It helps protect your data when you're using public networks. And thank you so much to our presidents, Alexander Christian Peter Clement, Daniel Eupedia Europe, Giuseppe HEVDJ, Kiki Loxen Michael Ave Europe, Rashid Shauki Jan, Stefan, and Unite Europe.